to look at lecture part 2. We're looking at suspensions and the common abbreviations that are used in the medication orders for suspension. It's not different, not much different from regular abbreviations that you will see, but there are some that are a little bit, I think, unique to it. But if you have a fair understanding of interpretation of medication orders and prescriptions, then this should not be a problem for you. This really is a refresher of that particular concept, but I thought it prudent for us to just go through. All right, so these are common symbols and abbreviations that you see in a prescription where suspension is written or requested. MITE, we all know that that means send or dispense. Alt die means every other day. So for example, 200 milligrams BID alt die POPC times 7/7. What this is really saying is that the person is to get 200 milligrams of the drug twice daily, that's every 12 hours, every other day, by mouth, after meals for 7 days. Now, what does that look like? Now, it is stated that the dose is for, you're to make a dose for 7 days supply. We all know that that's 7 days supply because it's 7/7. However, it doesn't mean that every day of those 7 days a person is going to be taking 200 milligrams of the drug. As a matter of fact, every other day or alt die means every other day of those 7 days. I often recommend to students to write out 7 strokes, which represents the 7 days, and you're going to start the drug obviously on day 1. So the person is going to take the first 200 milligrams on day 1, which is the first stroke, and then we will not take anything on the second day. So that means the second stroke, nothing will be taken there. But on the third stroke, another 200 milligrams will be taken, and that continues until all those 7 strokes are accounted for. So if we are going to be giving 200 milligrams every other day, twice a day for 7 days, it's 4 out of those 7 days. Every other day will work out to be 4 total days of taking 200 milligrams of drug. Okay, so that's very important for us to grasp. Again, alt day, we're really focusing on that. Here, instead of 7 days, we have 1 month. Of course, you are not going to be compounding a suspension for 30 days. And why is that? Because of the BUG order. The beyond use date is 14 days, up to 14 days, a maximum of 14 days, not 15, not 14 and a half days, 14 days. So it means for the first 14 days, you will be preparing a suspension for the first 14 days. And because it is alt die, if you're going to be taking, if the person is going to be required to take some dosing in 4 days, for 4 days from a 7-day drug regimen. Therefore, if you're going to be preparing for 14 days, that is 7 times 2, it means that the person will now be taking drugs for a total of 8 days. Of course, it's not 8 consecutive days, but every other day for 8 days, okay? So patient would have to return for another 14-day supply until the monthly prescription is completed. So generally speaking, especially if you're going to be working at places like Bustamante Hospital for Children, where suspensions are notoriously made there for our children because they can't take the tablets or the manufactured drugs that are on the market, we have to adjust or alter these dosage forms to make a suspension. And because we know that the maximum beyond use date is 14, We often have to be writing prescriptions for the patient. We never give more than 14 days supply. So the patient will take the first 14 days from the hospital. If they're living out of town, then they will have to now carry to their regular pharmacy for that prescription now to be filled for another 14 days until when the prescription runs out or they have another appointment to see their physician. MFT is not unique to suspensions, can be used for almost anything that you're going to mix and make. That's what MFT means. So MFT suspension, you're going to mix and make a suspension and you're going to send 100 mils of it, is what MFT suspension metered 100 mil is saying. And of course, dosing takes the form of teaspoon, TSP, or tablespoonful, in this case TBSP. So it's teaspoonful, TSP, and TBSP, tablespoonful. When we're calculating ingredients for compounding a suspension, there are some steps that we have to take. And we have to ensure that these steps are adhered to, or we have this in our minds so that we do not omit certain things or omit certain calculations and make our suspension calculation incorrect. So the first thing we have to do is interpret the signature correctly. If you do not interpret the signature correctly, meaning if you are not correctly calculating the dose for the patient or the total dose for the regimen, then it means no matter how well you calculate the suspending agent, the preservative, the vehicle, and everything else, if the signature is wrong, everything is wrong. So you have to ensure that your interpretation of the signature is correct. And if you interpret the signature correct, most likely you're going to be able to calculate the single dose. If there is a stat dose, you will also calculate that correctly. And if there is a maintenance dose, you'll also calculate those correctly. And we will look at what those terms mean shortly. You also then, after calculating the total amount of drug that you need to cover, 14 days or the however amount of days, up to 14 days that you are required to calculate, then you have to determine what is the source of my active pharmaceutical ingredient. Is it the raw material? Is it the pure drug? Or is it coming from a capsule? Or is it coming from a tablet? Then we're going to have to look at the total amount of active ingredient that I will need based on the beyond use date, which you would have calculated, obviously, from interpreting the signature. So, for example, in our previous example, we had 1 month supply for suspension, but we are not going to dispense 1 month. We are going to dispense 14. So it is from there that you're going to interpret and apply the beyond use date concept so that you are calculating the correct amount of active ingredient that is required based on the BUD. We're also going to be now calculating, once we've calculated the total active ingredient that we need, whether it be maximum 14 days or less, then we are going to have to calculate the total volume required. If it is a pure drug, then you calculate it straight away. But if you're calculating it based on either tablet or capsule as the source of the active ingredient, you're going to now readjust that volume, which we will also look into in subsequent slides. We have to now calculate the preservative required. Usually it is benzoic acid, and a concentration level of 0.1% in the final formulation must be calculated for, and calculation of the sweetener, which again has a range, and it is up to the compounder between 10 or up to 30%. Some books will say 10 to 20, some will say 10 to 30, but it depends on a number of factors, whether or not the ingredients you're using are quite bitter. Using 10% may not be palatable for the patient. You may need to up that concentration. And of course, you're going to be writing your new formula.